Hello, welcome back to Mandibil, and let's head directly back into deconstructing absolute philosophy, aka Nathan Hawkins' video series on idealism. So,
if you think existence is a fundamental notion, then you are an ontological realist.
Existence is a notion. Okay, so now we have a new thing called notion.
Which means you think that reality has a certain structure to it that is independent of the way we view it and talk about it.
So there's structure.
You think,
and you could argue that independent is also a term used. What does that mean, right? You might think that I'm sort of fly-fucking his term used, right? You have to use some terms to do philosophy. Sure. But you can't just take them out of nowhere, right? Just because you have heard the terms before doesn't mean that these understandings have been carved in marble and everybody knows what they're supposed to mean, right? You could say that if you're building a house, he's trying to build idealism. He has some tools in his toolbox, right? Now, those tools that are usually referred to using all these kinds of, up there, right? The terms I've listed here, these are the tools he's using to build the house called idealism, right? Now, if there's discrepancy between what he means by that tool and my understanding of that tool, I'm not sure what he's building. I might have an idea, but that's based on my understanding of that term. And to the best of my understanding of what I've seen so far during 15 years of diving into all sorts of philosophy, there is no consensus on what is meant by this, that, and the other, right? And, there's these cornerstones of philosophy, like what does it mean to exist? What does it mean to know? What does it mean that it's true? What is a moral principle, right? What is morality? What is right and wrong? These are the questions supposedly to be answered by philosophers. But then they start I'm bringing in the toolbox, right? And I'm going to use the terms facts, things, world, mind, reality, existence, object, truth, thoughts, certainty, theory, belief, knowledge, identity, entities, language, particle, notion, structure, and independent. So far, right? I'm just dragging them out of this toolbox as if these tools are just settled. But we have never been able to answer these particular cornerstone questions. Maybe it's because people haven't settled what they mean by the toolbox. They take the understanding for granted, right? That's what I'm trying to point to. You're taking shit for granted in order to explain something that is not taken for granted. That's why you're doing the presentation, I suppose, right? So, why do you need to explain something while you can take other shit for granted? The toolbox. Why can't you take that for granted that you're supposedly attempting to describe or explain or build the case for, right? Why can't I just take that for granted? So what it's possibly about this thing taking shit for granted. That is the problem. The problem is, in my opinion, that there has to be a direct correlation between the structure of the whole of your philosophy from the absolute foundation all the way to and potentially beyond the moral principle, right? Applied ethics or whatever, right? There, the tools you're using you're building a new tool or a new understanding on top of some old tools that you're describing through a direct reference to an experience. That's the way you do it. If you can't do it that way, I don't care about this midstream philosophy, which is taking all this shit up there for granted, right? It's taking shit for granted to explain something that is difficult to understand, right? It's the taking shit for granted midstream philosophy. That is the problem here, at least here, right? Okay.
Think that in reality there are objects with properties and relations. In other words, you think that facts exist in reality independently of mind and language. For the ontological realist, the true theory is the theory that corresponds to how things are.
Well, a theory cannot be true, right? A theory cannot be true because you need true empiricism in order to get to a theory, right? The example I tend to use is, the Eiffel Tower, the beaver, and Earth, right? And other objects like car keys and soft ice, pizzas and whatever, your mother-in-law. You walk up the Eiffel Tower with the beaver, and on the first ledge you let go of beaver, and don't do this at home, right? Be nice to beavers and other kinds of animals, right? Including human beings. And let it go, and you observe that it moves toward Earth, which is the thing that the Eiffel Tower is standing on, right? And you observe it starts to move towards Earth, and it reaches Earth, it stops and stays there, right? Maybe it changes form slightly, right? But that's the point. Then you take your car keys, you go down, grab your car keys, go up on the Eiffel Tower and let go of your car keys. And then you observe that they move towards Earth. And what you might also observe is it does it in the exact same pattern or manner that the beaver did. Then you do it with your soft ice and your pizza and your whatever you can do, your iPhone, and don't do this at home. It's a thought experiment, right? You take your desktop computer and you can do it with all sorts of shit, right? And it seems to do it in the same fashion. Now the theory is these are all made of the same thing. That's why they behave the same way. And that thing I'm referring to there, using the term thing from up there, right? To refer to something that is not really settled. I will call that matter. It's made of matter. That's why it behaves. But I don't know what matter is. Matter is a theory. It's an abstraction. It's basically an imagination, right? It doesn't mean that when I observe beaver, I'm observing matter. No, it was because I observed beaver and Eiffel Tower and Earth in relation to each other that I came up with the idea of matter, right? And by generalizing this way, I can come up with a theory about gravity, which is the general story being told about this kind of pattern. But what it took to me to get to that pattern or that description of a theory of gravity, which cannot be true. It's not something that can be true because it's a theory, right? If it could be true, you could observe it. You can't observe gravity, but you can observe beaver, which can be true, and Eiffel Tower, which can be true, and Earth, which can be true. And then you can observe their relation and their behavior, right? That behavior is an interpretation of the sort of relation between the objects. The objects are that which can be true because they are directly observable and cognizable in what would be called empiricism, right? That's what can be true. Your theory about what goes on cannot be true because you can't observe it, right?
And it should precisely correspond to it. That means that the things it refers to should be the things that exist, and the structure of its terms should directly correspond to the structure of the facts, such that the language itself mirrors the structure of reality. But in practice, we have no way of knowing what the structure of reality is independently of our thought. We think...
But structure what? That reality you're talking about, where is it? What is it? What is that reality? Because you're talking about things you experience, supposedly here, right? So if you say that my reality is that which I experience, fine. But then there's no other thing you need to clarify, right? If you're saying, okay, there is a reality somewhere beyond my experiences, and supposedly by implication here, he says, the computer and the table are some kind of representation of some aspects of an external world that I don't have access to, which I then call reality. Now, I would like the argument for why you think there is something beyond your experiences. I am not saying there isn't. All I'm asking for is the argument. Nobody, to the best of my understanding, have ever come up with an argument for why there must be an external world. It's just taken for granted. Nobody has argued. I'm emphasizing argued, because making an axiom that says I'm going to work from the idea that these tables and beavers and computers are representation of an external world, that's fine, but that's not an argument. That's why I say it can only be axiomized. An axiom is not an argument. It's basically saying I can't argue for it. I need to come up with an axiom in order to get further down the line. I decide that I need this in my philosophy. I'm not saying you have to do it, but it's my axiom, right? Now, this just pretending that it's given to him, or it's sort of obvious there's an external world, it's not obvious to me, because all I can ever refer to are my personal experiences. And if I think they are an outside those experiences, well, I'm creating a paradox, because I'm actually saying that way implied that my experiences are outside my experiences. That's a paradox. So they can't be outside my experience. If they're my experiences, they're not outside, right? And if they're outside, they can't be experienced. So why do I think there is this outside? Well, is it axiomatically decided? Well, then state that you're working from an axiom. And if you're not working from an axiom, it must be because you're arguing for it somehow. Then why are you not presenting the argument? Are you not aware of the problem of an external world here? You should be, right? You're Dr. Nathan Hawkins from Cambridge or wherever, right? I don't know where, but if you're a doctor, you probably went to university, right? Unless you stole that title. Have you any idea of the problem of an external world, right? The problem of other minds, which is sort of a derivative of the problem of an external world? And the heart problem is also a derivative or a particular problem or an aspect that arrives because of not identifying that paradox I talked about before. You're thinking you are experiencing an external world that you're then using to try to get back and explain an interior world. That's completely crazy, right? You need to go back to the drawing board, mate, right?
In terms of language. And so we can't directly peer at reality in a way that doesn't project the structures of our language and thought onto that reality in the...
But don't get so hung up about language, right? Language are just sounds. Language are just sounds, right? They're 1 out of 5 types of qualia, right? Qualia. Color, sound, taste, smell, and touch, right? Why are you so hung up about language? It could be colors and sounds if you're reading a book, or, smoke signals, whatever, right? But it's usually sound. You're talking, you're using sound here, right? Don't get so hung up about language, because language is merely a somewhat futile attempt at describing your thoughts. It's your thoughts that matter, because that's what you're dealing with or trying to sort out when you're doing philosophy. You're sorting out your experiences and making sure that you're doing some good thinking for your own sake, right? Right? Yeah, but I'm kind of beating this dead horse here, right? I'm repeating the point, but it's apparently very difficult for some people to. It's possibly most of why philosophy doesn't work or haven't worked throughout the ages is because of this paradox. People think they have access to an external world, while at the same time all they have access to is their world, right? Now, if you have been accustomed to thinking of your aspects or your experiences, your whatever you would call them, as an external world, then realize they're my experiences. Well, I don't think they're out there, right? If they're out there, I can't experience them. And if I experience them, they can't be out there. But then they say, okay, what I have is my experiences. But then they keep this external world as if it's still given to them. But that was not given at any point. It was just habitual thinking. That's why I'm saying, if you want to get back into that external world, you need to qualify how the hell you get there, right? You can't just say, it's given, right? Then why do we need to fiddle around with these little terms here, terms there, all this, if you can just have shit given to you, right? Right.
The process. Without being able to directly peer at the facts, it seems we have no way to decide between the different competing theories with their various structures and the entities they say exist. With no way of knowing which theory directly corresponds to the facts, there seems to be...
No, you can't. You're turning the cart. You're putting the cart before the horse, or you're putting the horse behind the cart, right? Behind Descartes. When you come up with a theory, it's because you have some experiences. Without any experiences, you wouldn't have come up with theories, right? If you haven't experienced beavers or car keys or Eiffel Towers on Earth and all that, you wouldn't start to fabulate about a theory of gravity, right? It's because you have experienced, or at least somebody has, right? And then, inflicted upon you to say, there's a theory out there, and you have to learn this on your university, right? It's because you have somebody has experience, and preferably yourself, right? And you came up with this theory of be based on these experiences. Then you can't turn it around and say, I have this theory. Now I have to prove the truth value looking at some experiences, right? You can't get to truth from a theory. It's because of truth that you get to a theory. If what you're using empirically is not true, then you're basing, potentially, in my opinion, your theory of something that is fluffy and possibly invalid. It's because of truth that you can make theories. Otherwise you couldn't, right? Or you shouldn't.
There seems to be no way to use truth to determine which theory is the correct one. At this point, some ontological realist philosophers like Timothy Williamson seek to mimic science and propose a principled way of determining ontology via the methods of theory choice. He puts forward this methodology in a recent book he wrote on metaphysics, where he says, "The methodology of this book is akin to that of a natural science. The theories are judged partly on their strength, simplicity, and elegance, partly on the fit between their consequences and what is independently known." Basically,
what a load of bollocks, right? Science is the slave of philosophy, right? Science is a particular way of dealing with experiences, I would say with cognitions, and use that to predict how things are how those types of cognitions, aspects, will be composed in the future if some scenario is the case, right? If this is the scenario, this is going to happen. That's the prediction of science. But that has nothing to do with philosophy, man, right? Because you have to go out there and experience shit, right? That you can come up with the theory based on experiencing shit has no bearing on philosophy as such, right? All you can do is basically maybe philosophize about what it takes to do science, or good science maybe, right? But then it stops there. But you have to do this fucking philosophy in order to do science. You can't bring in science to these attempts at, I'm bringing in science now to do metaphysics, right? Give me a fucking break. It just tells me everything about how ridiculously bad both philosophers and scientists, or philosophers about science, are at the moment. At this point, the state of the state of the art is pathetic, in my opinion. Right? These things are so simple to understand that it takes apparently some high-flying academics to screw it up, right?
The idea is to accept the theory that is able to express the greatest number of known truths while being as elegant as possible.
Known truths? But you... Aren't you circular now, right? You can't talk about known truths if you can't define what you mean by know and by truth, right? Does it take something to be true to know it? Or do you need to know something for it to be true? You're avoiding some very interesting and important questions here, right? And also, as I pointed out so many times, deconstructing other philosophers, most notably Bernardo Kastrup, you cannot bring in epistemology when you're doing ontology, right? Epistemology, which is a definition of knowledge, right? The philosophy you need to do in order to get to a definition of knowledge, in my opinion, that has to wait until you have settled your fucking toolbox, right? And the toolbox is your ontology / maybe metaphysics, right? Depending on your approach of these foundational things. So now you're talking about all the known truths. I mean, obviously you have no grasp of what you're really doing here, right? You're just sitting there throwing these terms up in the air so it sounds like you're smart. That's what I'm feeling at this point, right?
And committing to the fewest number of entities. Once you have that theory, you can read off what exists from that theory, because they will be the things that...
But you don't make a theory of what exists. I mean, do you live in a reality, or are you living in your sort of abstract philosophical cloud castle here? Do you need some kind of theory of existence to go down and buy some apples, right? To get it down to really an everyday earthy experience. Do you need some theory of existence and then I can find, otherwise I cannot buy apples? No, but you can find your fucking apples. You can find your asshole when you need to wipe it after you take a morning dump, right? You can brew yourself a coffee. You can ride a bicycle. You can go to university, right? You can put on your brown sweater. You can get a haircut, right? You'll figure out how to do that and shave your beard. And I mean, what more do you need? What more do you need in your everyday? Is philosophy just something you do in the evening sitting in your sofa and, because it feels good and, to wrap your head around these sort of intricate concepts of philosophy? And then you sort of leave that alone and wake up in the morning and forgot all about that. And there's no connection between what you're thinking when you're doing philosophy and your actual everyday goings about. Well, I would say that if you don't inflict your philosophy on your everyday experiences, you're not doing philosophy. You're not doing it right, at least, right? Because that's why you need to use it. At the end of the day, in my opinion, that's why I don't like philosophers who stops with metaphysics and say, I've done it, right? No, get to a definition of knowledge and get to a moral principle, right? Because that's what I have to apply in my everyday. Is it okay for me to take a morning dump or not? How would I know, right? Well, then I need some knowledge, and I will need a moral principle, right? And the knowledge and the moral principle are both sort of interdependent on some foundational shit that I have to do before I can do knowledge and moral principles, right?
Theory talks about. People who take this approach appeal to principles like Occam's razor, which says you shouldn't multiply entities beyond what is necessary. So if you have unnecessary entities floating around in your theory, you should get rid of them for the sake of simplicity. And since, by hypothesis...
I'm not sure that that's what Occam's razor actually says. I'm not an expert. I haven't studied Occam, right? But William of Ockham, British old philosopher, right? Okay, medieval. Occam's razor says if you have two theories, right, the simplest one is possibly the right one. But if you only have one theory, right, it starts to be very subjective whether or not particular entities are needed in this theory, right? Because there's nothing to compare it to. But if you have two competing theories about the same, it's possibly the one with fewest steps and fewest arguments and fewest entities or whatever you want to call it, right? That is the best one, right? At least it's the simplest one to apply or work from, because there's fewer shit. If it does the same, go with the simple one, right? I mean, it's likely to be the best one. If there's no guarantee, you might have overlooked something, right? It could possibly be too simple also, right? And that's one of the reasons why I don't like empiricism, or idealism, because it just seems too simplified. It has been simplified into one imagination or one abstraction called mind, right? That's too simple. That doesn't explain anything, right? I have my theory, philosophy is based on X. Everything is X, therefore explained, right? How does that work, right?
We are determining what exists by our best theory. That means that these entities, therefore, don't exist. Now, I think this whole approach is wrong. Very popular, but completely wrong. It tries to determine things like truth and existence by using values of a completely different kind. Strength, elegance, and parsimony are aesthetic and pragmatic features of a theory.
I would agree.
They have nothing at all to do with truth. Having fewer entities in your theory is certainly very useful in a theory. The more entities you have floating around, the more complicated it is to use that theory to make predictions. And there is a certain aesthetic quality that comes with a theory that is particularly strong and yet simple to describe. But so what? Why should practical matters about which kind of theory is more useful have anything to do with what's true or what exists? Why should we think reality is more likely to be simple than complex? And why should we expect reality to mirror our most...
I'm reminded that some of these criticisms I make here, I'm criticizing something where he might be sort of a devil's advocate, where he says, these people say this, without stating explicitly what he thinks about it. Now he presents it, and then at the end he says, okay, I don't think this is good thinking. Okay, fair enough. But then I have been criticizing what may come across as a criticism of his philosophy. This is also quite annoying. I pointed this out in the first part, I think, right? When you throw at me all sorts of philosophies, then which you then after 40 minutes or something like that says, I don't think this is good philosophy, then why the hell did you throw it at me? To confuse me? Or was it because that if you throw some bad philosophy at me and I realize it, yeah, I think I agree with you, it's bad philosophy, then I'm more likely to eat your philosophy, because you can then say, well, look at my philosophy here, right? That's also that's a sophist structure of arguing, right? Argument, maybe it's not an argument. Presentation, right? Just throw some bad philosophy at people and say, aha, and you can cherry pick from all sorts of weird philosophy that serves your purpose then, right? But I pointed out some shortcomings in the way he presents things here, where it implies that there are some foundational questions he doesn't deal with, right? He doesn't, if you present somebody else's philosophy, at least the terms they're using, you need to define from your own standard, right? Otherwise, it's a third-party definition that neither you or me have a clean understanding of what is meant by. That makes it even more fluffy, what we're dealing with here, right? I like to have some clear-cut things in my philosophy. Otherwise, I'm not taking, and if I discover this aspect of my own philosophy, I'm discarding it, or at least reforming it to be more rigid or rigorous, right? Than just the fluffy term. Therefore, philosophy, right?
Beautiful and simple theories. As far as I'm concerned, we shouldn't. The idea that pragmatic and...
There's no we. Well, how does a we work in your ontology? What's a we? Huh? What's a we? What is it? Isn't it a violation of categories, right? Are you more than one person? If you think there's more than one person, the I of your experience, and I'm transposing my experience onto you, right? If I say me, I'm not talking about the same category as a you, right? A me and a you is not of the same kind. A me is some kind of understand. Maybe it's even an abstraction, right? Maybe me is harder to get to than a you. But in any case, they're not of the same kind. I don't experience the color of me, right? But I can experience the color of you, or at least the representation of you, if I'm working from the axiom that you are a representation of something outside myself that I don't have access to. But then if you say a we, you are slamming two different categories together. So you have to take the I or the me as a separate category from the you and you and you and you over there, right? So therefore there is no we if you're lumping yourself into that category. And if you're not, what are you talking about, right?
Aesthetic concerns of theory choice have any bearing on the deep nature of what there is utterly groundless. As my favourite philosopher F.H. Bradley might say, such an approach to try and understand reality is barbarous metaphysics. Truth needs no ground. Truth is its own ground. It's not propped up by aesthetics and pragmatics. Besides, if you take the ontological realist approach, you end up having to pit theories against each other and make a choice. For example, biologists talk about DNA, but physicists don't. So does DNA exist or not? Or what about psychologists that talk about beliefs and desires? Do these exist? Or maybe we should read our ontology from economics and say there are entities such as dollars and market crashes. You get the point. Perhaps we might hold out hope for some grand scientific theory that can be deployed in all contexts, including biology, psychology, and economics. But the evidence of that happening is not great so far. We seem to be proliferating scientific disciplines and not merging them. And although it might be assumed that physics is the one science to rule them all, such that all scientific truths are actually physical truths, that assumption is a complete act of faith, especially given the now incompatible theories of quantum mechanics and physics' incredible...
No, but quantum mechanics is a pure theory, right? Macroscience is based on individual empirical observation. When I make the observation about the beaver and the car key and the pizza I am dropping from the Eiffel Tower, I'm actually cognizing that which I'm describing. Or yeah, if I'm describing, gravity through a theory, I am using those direct experiences to come up with the theory. And I'm observing them. I'm not observing the pattern through it's the comparison between various experiences and prior experiences of the same scenario where the same pattern is observed, right? I'm comparing it to a memory of prior experiences. Otherwise, I would never get to a theory, because I would say, that's weird, how that beaver moves to Earth. And then I forget, I have no memory, and do it again, and I say, that's weird, right? If you've seen the movie Memento, may give you a point or an idea of what I mean, right? So if you if you don't have direct experience, you don't have anything. Now you could build upon those direct experience as representations of something else that you then make a theory about. So it's more indirect than a direct experience of beaver, right? So if you're saying I am experiencing some patterns on a photosensitive thing in the Large Hadron Collider, right? Then what you're experiencing there are the traces of what happened. And from the traces, you predict what might have happened. And from that, you create a theory, right? Like if I could only if I only had the traces of beaver as it moved to Earth, for whatever reason, right? Then I could make a theory from that maybe, but it would not be the same as observing the beaver directly moving toward Earth, right?
Reliance on the
and that's what I want to get to. That's the difference between quantum mechanics and actual, called macro science, right? Everyday science, what is usually known as science, is just a very condensed and formalized way of everyday science, right?
Truths of mathematics. And to those that then shift focus to mathematics and say things like, everything is just numbers, I can only reply with what in philosophy is called the...
Well, that's also stupid, right? And I would agree with him. But if you're going to buy a tomato and somebody said, well, it's just numbers, well, fuck off, man, right? I'm going to eat this fucking tomato after I bought it, of course, right? And if you can eat it right away or whatever, right? Let me have your moral principle, but that's way more important than it's probably only numbers, that tomato, right? Get away from you pathetic loser, right?
Incredulous stare. I honestly have no idea how anyone can believe that reality is purely quantitative and contains no quality. Do they not have feelings? In the words of George Orwell, some...
No, okay. So, when you have a feeling, is that feeling a part of you, your mind, so to say, or is it something that is a representation of something outside your mind? It's the dichotomy between, are we dealing with something that you consider yours, or are you transposing or what's it called? You're moving that experience as being outside, as a part of that external world you call reality. But it can't be both ways. Then you are appealing to that paradox, right? My experiences are outside my experiences. None of your experiences are outside your experience. They are confined to your experiences. And if there is only experiences, it's solipsism. Problem solved, right? Or if there's an external world to your experiences, then your experiences are not out there. They are in your experiences and not beyond your experiences. And if the reality you're trying to deal with is beyond your experiences, then what are you attempting to do? Are you trying to jump out of your own experience and say, aha, now I have penetrated the doors of perception. I am in the external world now. Well, you can't be, because if you're experiencing it, it's a part of your experiences, right? So, in other words, you can't get out of your experiences. And if you can't get out of your experiences, how the hell did you got to the idea of an external world? Argue for it, or give me, admit that you have to do it axiomatically. Right?
Some ideas are so stupid that only intellectuals believe them. Fortunately...
Okay, a relaxed alternative. Let's keep that for the next part, right? So, enough said. I'm happy you joined me, and I'm looking forward to see you again in the next one. Have a nice day. See you there.